On the afternoon of October 24, 1944, the Sibuyan Sea in the Philippine archipelago witnessed one of the largest naval battles in human history. The sky, grim with autumn clouds, made the dusk gloomy, reflecting off the rough sea waves dotted with colossal warships. From the cockpit of his F-6F Hellcat, Major David McCampbell, the U. Navy's top ace, saw a sight that made his heart stop. Below, the Imperial Japanese Navy was deploying the most formidable force he had ever seen in his entire career, and at the center of that formation was a steel monster that dwarfed everything else the battleship Musashi. This colossal ship was one of the most astonishing engineering achievements of the Japanese Navy, a sister ship to the legendary Yamato. At 263 meters long and displacing up to 72,800 tons when fully loaded, Musashi was like a mobile island on the sea, but its true power lay in its 18.1-inch main guns, which could hurl 3 200-pound shells up to 42 kilometers. Each gun was an engineering marvel, requiring 100 sailors to operate. The deck was armored with steel up to 9 inches thick, while its sides had a 16-inch armor belt, creating a nearly impregnable floating fortress. For the American pilots, this was not just a target, but the very embodiment of Japanese naval power, a symbol that had to be destroyed. For the next several hours, McCampbell witnessed a fierce and seemingly hopeless assault. Over 250 aircraft from the carriers USS Essex, USS Intrepid, and USS Lexington dove in to attack Musashi in a drama of courage and tragedy. Mark 13 torpedoes plunged into the sea, but they moved too slowly and mostly missed or failed to inflict significant damage on the giant ship's thick armor below the waterline. Dive bombs from heavy SB-2C Helldivers plummeted from thousands of feet, but most missed the fast-moving target, or, if they hit, only caused scratches on the resilient deck armor. The TBF Avenger torpedo bombers pressed in at low altitude, facing a dense wall of anti-aircraft fire from Musashi's over 100 gun batteries. The ship's air defense system was a lethal network of 127 metm, 25 meters, and 13.2 meter machine guns, creating a thick carpet of fire that made any approaching aircraft pay a heavy price. As night fell, Musashi was still afloat, still moving despite being wounded, and still a terrible threat to the American landing forces at Leyte Gulf. Every orthodox method had failed. The cost of that failure was 18 American planes shot down, along with the lives of 36 pilots and gunners. What McCampbell and his commanders didn't know was that at that moment, a young, little-known officer was en route with an idea that completely contradicted every tactical doctrine of the U. Navy. He had quietly developed a forbidden dive-bombing technique, a method considered suicidal in the tactical manuals, and it would become the only key to unlocking the steel door of the Japanese super-battleship. His name was Lieutenant Donald J. D. O'Hare, the son of a naval hero who had been awarded the Medal of Honor, and he was about to write a new chapter in naval aviation history with his own calculated recklessness. The problem lay in physics and the rigid doctrine the U.S. Navy had adhered to for decades. The standard dive-bombing technique had been meticulously developed over years of experience. The standard procedure approached the target at 12,000 to 15,000 feet, then dive at an angle of 65 to 70 degrees. At an altitude of about 2,000 feet, the pilot would release the bomb, then pull the aircraft out of the dive with significant G-force. This procedure offered high accuracy and allowed the pilot enough time and space to exit safely from the danger zone. But it had a fatal flaw when facing a specially designed target like Musashi. Musashi's deck armor was not merely a thick steel plate. It was a masterpiece of armored engineering, combining multiple layers of specially heat-treated steel with extreme durability. The standard American 1,000-pound armor-piercing bomb, when dropped from 2,000 feet according to standard procedure, simply did not have enough kinetic energy to penetrate that armor. Calculations showed the bomb's velocity upon impact was insufficient to overcome the penetration threshold carefully designed by the Japanese. It would bounce or detonate on the surface, causing external damage but failing to reach vital areas inside like the magazines, boiler rooms, or engines. Intelligence reports from previous attacks had confirmed this. Clearly, bombs detonated on the deck, creating fires and smoke, but failing to inflict mortal blows. Musashi could absorb dozens of direct hits and continue fighting. Thanks to its watertight compartment design and sophisticated damage control system, a completely new approach was clearly needed, one that could provide enough penetration to defeat the formidable deck armor. Lieutenant O'Hare, an engineer who had graduated from the Naval Academy before enlisting, had been obsessively studying this problem for weeks. He spent hours in the operations room, analyzing damage reports, studying the technical specifications of Japanese warship armor, and running complex calculations. He realized that for a 1,000-pound bomb to pierce Musashi's deck armor, it needed to be dropped from a very steep dive, at a dangerously low altitude, to maximize its velocity and penetration. His spreadsheets indicated that an 80-degree dive, releasing the bomb below 1,000 feet, was necessary to achieve sufficient velocity. There was one small problem: it was in direct violation of every U.S. Navy safety protocol. The dive bomber tactical manual, the Bible for every pilot, stated clearly, "Never release bombs below 1,500 feet in a steep dive. The risk of the aircraft being caught in its own bomb's blast or debris is very high." Furthermore, diving at 80 degrees meant the plane was in an almost vertical freefall, making it an extremely stable and predictable target for Japanese anti-aircraft gunners. At such a low altitude, the time to pull out of the dive was incredibly short, and the risk of crashing into the sea or the ship's structure was immense. In the eyes of the commanders, it was considered pure suicide. O'Hare had presented his idea to his squadron commander, Major John C. Waldron, a seasoned veteran with a conservative attitude toward aviation tactics. Waldron, a traditional Navy man, flatly refused. "O'Hare, you'll kill yourself and any fool who follows you. We stick to the book, that's why it was written, in the blood of those who came before us." This rejection did not deter O'Hare. He continued to refine his calculations, even conducting secret test flights to test his theory, albeit without bombs. But after the failure in the Sibuyan Sea, as news of Musashi's survival spread throughout the fleet, a quiet desperation began to creep into the command ranks. On the morning of October 25th, O'Hare sought out Waldron again. This time, he didn't bring spreadsheets or technical charts. Instead, he looked his commander straight in the eye and said, "Major, the book has failed. We lost 18 men without sinking it. I request to lead a volunteer flight, just 3 or 4 planes. If it doesn't work, I'll never mention it again." Waldron stared at the tactical map, where Musashi's estimated position was marked with a red circle. He knew that if that monster escaped, it could return and inflict disaster on the invasion fleet concentrating in Leyte Gulf. The pressure from high command was weighing heavily on him. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he nodded reluctantly. "All right, O'Hare, you have 3 planes, and for God's sake, try to come back." At 10:15 a.m., under a still overcast sky, Lieutenant Donald O'Hare led a flight of 3 Curtiss SB-2C Helldivers off the deck of the USS Intrepid. Each carried a 1,000-pound armor-piercing bomb, equipped with a delayed fuse to allow the bomb to penetrate the deck before exploding. His 2 wingmen, Lieutenant Richard Dick Cole and Ensign William "Billy" Roberts, were both volunteers. Men who had heard O'Hare's plan and were willing to share the risk. The atmosphere in the cockpit was as taut as a bowstring. They knew the survival rate for this mission was extremely low. As they approached the target area, they spotted Musashi moving slowly westward, escorted by a destroyer, still trying to withdraw after the previous day's bombardments. Even damaged, the ship still exuded an air of majesty and menace. Its anti-aircraft system was still robust, with its gun batteries ready to fire, instead of climbing to the standard 12,000 feet. O'Hare led his flight to 8,000 feet. This was part of his calculated plan dive from a lower altitude to minimize their exposure time to flak, while still ensuring enough altitude to build up the necessary velocity. As they rolled over to begin their dives, Musashi's 25mm AA guns opened up, painting a black and red carpet of fire across the sky. Tracers drew deadly orange lines toward the diving planes. O'Hare yelled into the intercom, his voice strangely calm amidst the chaos. 80 degrees. Remember, 80 degrees, release at 800. Good luck. Then he pushed the stick of his heavy helldiver forward, beginning a dive that would go down in history. The sensation was horrifying. The plane was in an almost vertical freefall, its nose pointed straight at the sea. The G-force pulled his face taut, pressing his body into the seat. He could clearly see every detail on the giant ship below, which swelled in size at a dizzying rate. The altimeter unwound frantically. 7,000 feet, 5,000 feet, 3,000 feet. The airframe shuddered violently under the anti-aircraft fire. A piece of shrapnel tore through his right wing, damaging part of the wing mechanism. 2,000 feet. He could hear the shriek of the wind through the holes in the fuselage. 1,500 feet. The aircraft's warning horn blared, warning him to pull up. He ignored it, his eyes glued to the gun sight, keeping the ship in his crosshairs. 1,000 feet, 900 feet, 850 feet, 800 feet. In that brief moment, everything seemed to slow down. He hit the bomb release. The 1,000-pound bomb left the belly of the plane with a characteristic clunk immediately. O'Hare pulled back on the stick with all his strength. The helldiver groaned under the tremendous G-force, the airframe making sounds as if it were about to break apart. He felt a violent jolt as the bomb behind him detonated. The blast nearly threw his plane, creating an aerodynamic whirlwind that knocked the helldiver off its trajectory. As he regained control and glanced back over his shoulder, he saw a sight that made his heart stop. A column of fire and black smoke was billowing from the center of Musashi, just behind the No. 2 main turret. He had hit it perfectly. Lieutenant Cole, right behind O'Hare, also released his bomb at a similar altitude. His bomb pierced the deck and exploded deep within the structure, causing a second, violent explosion. Ensign Roberts, the third helldiver, was not so lucky. His plane took a direct flak hit and burst into flames just as he began his dive. But Roberts, knowing he wouldn't survive, held his dive path with extraordinary courage. His burning plane dove like a missile, and his bomb also detonated on the deck just seconds before the aircraft slammed into Musashi's superstructure, causing a third, horrifying explosion. 3 bombs, 3 precise hits, all released using O'Hare's illegal method, from an altitude that was unthinkable according to the manuals. While O'Hare and Cole, wounded and flying battered planes, limped back to the fleet. True hell had been unleashed on the Musashi. O'Hare's bomb had pierced the armored deck and exploded in a sealed compartment near an engine room, causing a rapidly spreading fire and damaging the propulsion system. Cole's bomb had completely destroyed a boiler room, causing the ship's speed to drop to just 6 knots. Roberts's explosion had started an uncontrollable fire in the superstructure and completely paralyzed the damage control system. With these mortal wounds, Musashi began to list heavily to port. Water poured in uncontrollably through the holes that previous attacks had failed to create. The Japanese crew's damage control efforts became futile against the severe level of damage. 4 hours after O'Hare's attack, at 7:36 p.m., the super-battleship Musashi officially sank into the blue waters of the Sibuyan Sea, taking over 1,000 Japanese sailors with her. Only about 1/300 of the two 399-man crew were rescued. News of Musashi's death, confirmed by reconnaissance planes, sent a wave of excitement and disbelief through the American fleet. How could just 3 planes accomplish what an entire air group could not? This question echoed from the command rooms to the mess halls. When O'Hare and Cole landed safely on the deck of the Intrepid, their planes were barely flyable, their fuselages riddled with holes and their landing gear heavily damaged. O'Hare's report to Major Waldron was brief and modest. "The method worked, sir. We hit it 3 times. Roberts didn't make it back." Waldron, looking at the scars of battle etched into O'Hare's Helldiver, said nothing for a long moment. Then he just nodded, his eyes filled with respect, and said, "Very well. I'll inform the Admiral." News of O'Hare's feat quickly spread throughout the Pacific Fleet. Initially, there was skepticism, then awe-struck admiration. His extreme dive technique, nicknamed O'Hare's Strike by the pilots, was criticized by orthodox tacticians as reckless and unrepeatable, but the results were undeniable. They had sunk a super-battleship that every standard method had failed to stop. In the following weeks, other squadrons, inspired by O'Hare's success, began to adopt variations of this technique. The sinking rate of heavily armored Japanese warships increased significantly. O'Hare was not awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions, perhaps because his method was considered unorthodox and violated established safety rules. Instead, he received the Navy Cross, a well-deserved recognition of his bravery. But his true legacy was not in medals or titles, it was the permanent change in naval aviation doctrine. The tactical manuals were rewritten after this event. The high-angle, low-altitude release method became the new standard for attacking heavily protected targets. O'Hare's technique had proven a key lesson in modern warfare flexibility. Creativity and daring are often more valuable than blind adherence to dogma. When all official methods failed, it was an individual's courage to challenge the rules, combined with meticulous calculation, that was able to make history and change the tide of the war. The story of O'Hare and O'Hare's Strike will forever be a testament to the spirit of innovation and bravery in the most extreme circumstances.